Hey, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., I'm the newsman, Sam Sachs, and it's the Friday show. Good morning to everyone, and a happy International Asteroid Day to all who celebrate. It was created in 2015 to raise awareness of the threat of asteroids to all life on Earth. Yeah, very chill holiday. I guess you're supposed to celebrate it by being anxious as hell all day. Which, if so, I've already got that covered. For more than 40 years, conservatives have been trying to dismantle race-conscious college admissions programs, known as Affirmative Action, and on Thursday, they finally got the right makeup on the Supreme Court to do it. In a 6-3 decision on party lines, the conservative majority ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina were violating the U.S. Constitution by taking race into consideration in its admissions process in order to maintain a diverse student body. The decision upends Supreme Court precedent going all the way back to 1978, and given the structural inequities that still exist in the U.S. education system, it will likely result in a decline in minority representation on college campuses. On the other hand, it does prevent the whiniest, most mediocre white people from using affirmative action as an excuse for why they didn't get into the school of their choice. Now they just have to reckon with the fact that they suck. So I guess there's that. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion, which took the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, passed after the Civil War to ensure equal rights to former slaves, and used it to construct a colorblind college admissions process in a world of higher education that is still not colorblind. The same Equal Protection Clause used by the court in 1954 to end state-sanctioned segregation in public schools in Brown v. Board of Education is now being used in a way that will likely further segregate institutions of higher learning. Now, 3 things of note with this decision. First, it does not apply to military schools. The majority opinion carved them out, allowing them to still use race-conscious admissions programs to ensure a diverse fighting force. The implication being that diversity is not a virtue when educating the future doctors, lawyers, and engineers of society, but it absolutely should be when we're talking about who gets to die on a battlefield. We must ensure there's sufficient minority representation in the cannon fodder. Second, the court argued college admissions are a zero-sum game, so by definition, students who do not receive the benefit of a race-conscious admissions program are harmed by it. And yet the court did not touch the issue of legacy admissions, in which schools give some of those limited spots to students based not on their merit, but on where their rich parents went to school or how much their family has donated to the school. That, according to the court, is totally fine. And third, the Roberts Court opinion did create a loophole for colleges to still consider race in the admissions process, but only, as Roberts described, quote, when considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. In other words, schools can take race into account to admit a student because they overcame prejudice and adversity due to their identity, but not admit someone based on that identity alone. Harvard seized on that language and issued a statement after the ruling that said, quote, the court held that Harvard College's admission system does not comply with the principles of the Equal Protection Clause embodied in Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The court also ruled that colleges and universities may consider in admissions decisions in applicants' discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. We will certainly comply with the court's decision. So schools can still take steps to ensure more diversity on campus. They just have to read a lot more personal essays during the admissions process. President Biden slammed the majority's decision, and when asked by reporters if the court was rogue, he stated that it is not a normal court. And later, during an interview on MSNBC, Biden conceded that the court is too conservative and too young and has the potential to do a lot of damage. But when asked if he plans to do anything about that, like adding more justices, Biden said this.
Well, I think they may do too much harm, but I think if we start the process of trying to expand the court, we're going to politicize it maybe forever in a way that is not healthy.
That you can't get back.
That you can't get back.
Oh, don't want that to happen. Don't want the court that just killed off affirmative action on political lines to be considered political. The court that ended the right to an abortion last year also on political lines. And the same court that, I'm guessing by the time the show airs, just blew apart Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, likely on political lines. The same court that achieved its conservative majority in part thanks to political maneuvering by Mitch McConnell to block Barack Obama from appointing a justice. Surely can't have it perceived to be too political. You know, it's been more than 2 years since President Biden signed an executive order to create a commission to look into ways to reform the Supreme Court. That commission released its report in December 2021, but did not provide any recommendations to the White House, and thus the issue was promptly cast aside by the president. And since then, this illegitimate conservative court has dragged the country backwards 60 years, all while being corrupt as hell. Turning now to news out of France, which is again dealing with a restive citizenry. The Macron government says it arrested more than 600 people overnight Thursday as riots over the police killing of a teenager continue in cities across the country. It all started on Tuesday when a French police officer shot and killed a young man for driving in the bus lane. It took place west of Paris in the suburb of Nanterre, an economically disadvantaged neighborhood of immigrants who have long felt neglected by the government and like they're victims of police repression. The officer in the shooting was detained and is being investigated for homicide, but that hasn't quelled the unrest, which is reminiscent of the 2005 riots in Paris that were also sparked by a police killing, in that case of 2 teenagers. But by all accounts, this episode of instability presents a greater threat to the French state than the 2005 riots. The country's interior minister called up 40,000 security forces to try to maintain order. Reports of businesses being vandalized and looted, cars overturned, schools burned down, bus depots set ablaze. The government claimed that 250 officers have been injured in clashes. French Prime Minister said on Friday that all options are on the table to restore order, including declaring a state of emergency. This is the second wave of mass protests the Macron government has had to deal with this year alone. Trade unions organized protests for weeks, rallying hundreds of thousands of people against a new law to raise the retirement age in the country. Only in the last month or so have those protests subsided. Macron has an inflated view of himself and has often compared himself to Greek gods and French kings in the past. And if he keeps governing the way he is, he might indeed end up like a French monarch. King Louis XVI, that is. And finally, homelessness is on the rise in major cities across the U.S. The Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority reported a 10% surge in the city's unhoused population last year. The agency found more than 46,000 people are now living on the streets in L.A. And as Courthouse News reported, it's a similar story in other metro areas, as nationwide, the homeless population has been increasing by about 6% each year. In San Diego, it increased 22% over the last year. In Columbus, Ohio, it rose 20%. Portland, Oregon also saw a 20% increase. And Chicago saw a staggering 58% increase. One explanation out of Chicago is that eviction moratoriums during the pandemic have now expired, and as a result, people are being removed from their homes at near the same rate as before the pandemic. WBEZ Chicago reported that in May alone, more than 800 tenants were evicted from their homes. That's the highest number of evictions enforced in a single month by the Cook County Sheriff's Office in the last 4 years. And overall, in 2022, landlords submitted about 29,000 eviction filings, which is just 300 fewer than the 2019 total, and a number roughly equivalent to the population of an entire Chicago suburb like Highland Park or Niles. In New York City, a record number of 100,000 people are now living in homeless shelters, although a sizable chunk of those people are migrants who were bused or flown to the city by Republicans in states like Texas and Florida. Still, there is the issue of rising rent prices in New York City. For the second year in a row, Mayor Eric Adams allowed stabilized rents to go up in 2023, affecting millions of New Yorkers. On Thursday, Adams was asked about rising rents and accused of being owned by real estate interests. He had this reaction.
In Nassau, they had a 0% rent increase. Why in New York City, where the real estate is controlling you, Mr. Mayor, why are we having these horrible rent increases last year and this year?
Okay, first, if you're going to ask a question, don't point at me and don't be disrespectful to me. I'm the mayor of this city, and treat me with the respect I deserve to be treated. I'm speaking to you as an adult. Don't stand in front like you treated someone that's on the plantation that you own. Give me the respect I deserve and engage in a conversation up here in Washington Heights. Treat me with the same level of respect I treat you. So don't be pointing at me. Don't be disrespectful to me. Speak with me as an adult because I'm a grown man. I walked into this room as a grown man, and I'm going to walk out of this room as a grown man. I answered your question.
Dude, you're the mayor. That's exactly how people should talk to you. But I guess if you whinge enough about manners, you can try to wriggle out of answering why you're doing the bidding of real estate capital. What an asshole. Anyway, these staggering levels of homelessness is what capitalism in the US looks like with unemployment at record lows. Grim.
I'm a bitter neoliberal subject with no attention span. Where's a variety show for me?
Well, now you can with our house politics.
Toadette, Black Bloc, Antifa.
Hot take.
Holly the Elf.
We must advance the directive.
It'll make you laugh. It'll make you cry. It'll even make you think.
Capitalism. Fascism.
The American dream.
Politics, we cover all kinds of stuff. Math.
Category of morphisms.
Video games.
Why can't we just have all the reaching one?
Culture.
John Lennon's Imagine is a monstrosity.
Animals. Fine art.
Oil painting is not a serious art.
Technology.
This is what it looks like.
빈민가도 있고 아닌 것도 있고.
Thanks for sticking around with me all week and to the end of today's show. We're so close to the weekend, but no rest until a rich dick is named. So let's get to it. The always reliable Rona nominated all the goddamn landlords, particularly landlords who are now trying to collect rents off rent, luring people into installment payments to cover their rent. The ownership class is always conceiving of new ways to squeeze profit out of the working class. We've got what appears to be another weekly standing nomination for Oprah for unspecified violations, and lots of nominations for the corrupt pricks on the Supreme Court, but I think we already covered that earlier in the show. Thanks to everyone for making their voices heard. But in the end, this week's Rich Dick is Chamath Palihapitiya. The billionaire Silicon Valley venture capitalist finally gets his turn. I feel like we've been circling this guy for a while now. He's one of the co-hosts of the All In podcast alongside prior Rich Dick David Sachs. No relation. Podcast is basically a bunch of rich tech bros gassing each other up. Thanks to Sunny Phone Show for the nomination, which was mainly focused on a stupid as shit tweet that Chamath posted this week. He cited new data showing that southern states have seen increased economic activity in recent years, suggesting an economic shift from the Northeast to the South. Chamath's takeaway, quote, "Go woke, go broke." The implication, I guess, being that people are moving south to avoid the woke mind virus up north. Yeah, he's one of those guys. When pressed by fellow billionaire Mark Cuban to name just one company that went bankrupt because it went woke, Chamath couldn't. And later, Chamath said that actually people are probably moving to Florida because of the nice weather. I guess the weather up north is just woker. It's funny that Chamath thinks wokeism is to blame for companies failing and not, his own hand, because he's been racking up some investment L's recently. Chamath got big into the SPAC boom in recent years. SPACs, or special purpose acquisition companies, are firms that are established and go through an IPO with the sole purpose of buying another private business and thus making it public. Chamath started and invested in several SPACs, so much so he became known as the SPAC King. Investors in these firms put trust in its operators to buy the right company, and when money was cheap a few years ago, it was easy to hit. Now, in a more restricted economy, the SPAC craze has resided, and Chamath's earnings are way off their high mark. As Bloomberg reported, quote, "For Palihapitiya, a man who has taken to calling himself the heir apparent to Warren Buffett, SPACs represent a big chunk of his portfolio, and the collapse in their value over the past year and a half, and for that matter, of the value of the entire industry, has put a dent in his net worth." And yes, Chamath was extremely obnoxious on the way up, which is definitely worth pointing out on the way down. Bloomberg added, quote, "All 5 of his SPACs that merged with acquisition targets are now trading well below their starting price of $10. Some, like Virgin Galactic Holdings, Inc., are down more than 25%, taken from its peak price back in February 2021, when Palihapitiya was tweeting things like "trust the process" with a screenshot of his SPAC returns. The stock is down 88%. Here's another one, quote, "Back at the height of the boom in early 2021, he'd fire off bursts of tweets one after the other about his latest SPAC exploits, like in January when he retweeted a post of the performance of the SPACs he invested in and tacked on a Jay-Z lyric for emphasis. Only one of the 6 stocks mentioned in the thread is trading higher today than it did at the time. The median decline, 79%. Receipts, receipts, receipts everywhere. The problem is Chamath still walked away from this wreckage with money. As the New York Times reported, quote, "Some of the stocks of Mr. Palihapitiya's SPACs have dropped nearly 90% from when they were listed. By selling most of his shares early, he roughly doubled the $750 million he put in, mostly into the entities he backed, but many small investors who followed his advice may not fare so well." And Chamath has taken these ill-gotten gains, and instead of investing them in something useful like a seat on the OceanGate submersible, he's throwing money at the RFK Jr. campaign and getting his rich dick friends to do so as well. Earlier this month, Chamath and David Sachs, no relation, hosted a fundraiser for RFK Jr. Chamath described the presidential candidate who thinks China is building ethnic weapons and Wi-Fi makes you sick as a, quote, really authentic and sensitive person who tells you the truth no matter how awkward it is to hear. Well, he is partially right. It is awkward when some crank starts going off about 5G and you just have to nod and slowly find a different seat on the bus. Chamath, though, just gives the guy $500,000 to run for president. Because of that, and all the SPAC stuff I mentioned, and the woke mind virus rantings, Chamath isn't just your bog standard VC tech bro dipshit. He's also this week's Rich Dick. All right, gang, the show ends this morning with a sunrise from Arizona. It was sent in by our comrade Elizabeth in Santan Valley. It's a good one. Enjoy. Thank you, Elizabeth. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please, if you haven't yet, sign up for Means TV. There's a 7-day free trial going on right now. Also, subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. One day, capitalism's gonna fall. I promise. Until then, though, we're gonna be right here. Except for a few days next week that the team has off, but we'll be back on Thursday. See you then.